Hey guys, welcome to Eat, Play, Poo. I'm your co-host, Brad, and soon Jeannie's going to join me. We're going to be interviewing Bianca Harrington from Microba. Bianca's an accredited dietitian and the lead microbiome coach there. She's got some fantastic analysis she's going to share with us. Basically she's working, I guess around the dietary management, food tolerances, especially associated with irritable bowel syndrome. She's passionate about further understanding the microbiome. She's got so much info to share. We talk about, prebiotics, and we talk about the low FODMAP diet, long-term benefits or symptoms, causes. We talk about some of the analysis of different diets and different types of people, whether you're a fit athlete or you have IBS or some sort of condition. So lots and lots of stuff to cover off. And then she's got her best gut health tips. So some really good ones in there. So make sure you stay tuned right throughout the video. And it's over to the interview now.
Hello, Bianca. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And how are you guys?
Really good, thank you. So tell us a little bit about your role at Microba and how did you actually get there in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an accredited practicing dietitian, and when I was in my first year of university, I contracted the deadly meningococcal meningitis virus, and basically nearly lost my life as a result of that. And understanding what I know now about the gut microbiome, I was pumped through with a lot of different types of antibiotics and all sorts of medications, which at the time obviously kept me alive. But unfortunately, then I was left with a chronic condition, which was IBS. So I have essentially struggled with IBS for the last 9 years of my life. And so naturally, as I finished my degree as a dietitian, I was pulled into this space of understanding how to manage irritable bowel syndrome through diet. And that's essentially when all of the research around the gut microbiome was starting to explode. So when this role for Microba became available to become one of their lead microbiome coaches, I just knew that this role was for me because I'm so passionate about helping people understand gut health, but specifically I really love helping people learn how to better manage their irritable bowel syndrome through diet, and also understand all of the different factors that can impact irritable bowel syndrome and how to create a lifestyle that's going to help them with managing that as well.
Yeah, great. So as a coach at Microba, just for the people that are watching this, is that for the public or is that for practitioners, or do you do a bit of both of that sort of coaching?
Yeah, definitely both. So we have our consumer insight product, which essentially that any consumer can access the product. They can purchase it online. It's a very simple, easy to use home testing kit that they can send back to our laboratory. And then they get a report around how their gut microbiome is looking in regards to diversity, the species that are there, as well as the functions. And so what we do is we help or empower our customers to be able to understand their report, to understand the science, because it is quite complex. So we really work to help everyday people understand how their gut microbiome is impacting their health and what they can do to change that. But we also help practitioners as well. So generally a lot of people who do seek out this kind of testing do have health conditions, potentially multiple conditions that they need to manage quite well, and really they need that input from the practitioners. So alongside helping consumers, we're also assisting practitioners to utilize this type of testing in their practice to help improve their patient outcomes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I think I first saw Microba maybe on Catalyst. It was a few years ago now, but I remember thinking these guys are going to be huge because, just the growing interest from practitioners and just the consumer in what their microbiome is doing after, I guess there's been a few really good books come out, and just that interest is exploding along with the research. And for a consumer to be able to understand specifics of what's going on inside their gut and to have tips and pointers on how they can manage that just through specific foods, I think it's great what you guys are doing, your food and lifestyle to manage gut microbiome. So.
Well, it seems the awareness has just accelerated over the last few years, almost to the point now where it's like wow, there's so much information out there. There's so many diets. There's so many probiotics, and everyone's got a gut-friendly product and all this. So what do I do?
It can be overwhelming, I think, for a consumer.
So it's great to see that, like, some science, there's some science starting to develop behind the whole thing. So tell us a little bit about, the low FODMAP diet, prebiotics, IBS, and I guess some of the benefits and downsides to the microbiome on, taking these things.
Yeah, for sure. So look, definitely when you look at the literature, low FODMAP diet can definitely have its place helping people to manage their symptoms. But unfortunately, and this is one of the consequences that we do see quite a lot, is that people don't necessarily return back to a full diet. They don't always necessarily go through the stage 2 and then 3. So stage 2 of the low FODMAP diet is the reintroduction, and then stage 4 or phase 3 is where they create that long-term plan in order to meet their nutritional needs. And I guess the downside to that is nutritionally, people have a very restricted diet, which can pose nutritional complications. There's a risk for malnutrition. There's a risk for, potentially low BMIs too, if they're losing large amounts of body weight. But then if we look potentially at the gut microbiome, you're not getting that diversity of plant-rich fibers in your diet. It's whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, all of these incredible fuel sources that are just limited, really. And what we then see is that our beneficial bacteria, they just can't survive or sustain themselves. They get reduced. And then you tend to see the shift to more pro-inflammatory microbiome. So you tend to see that bacteria that promote inflammation tend to increase in size and numbers, because they're generally bacteria that consume protein, and that's always readily available when there's an absence of fiber in the diet.
Yeah, and I speak to people like Brad and myself have been running market stalls for 7 years now, and always, talking to people with irritable bowel syndrome. The FODMAP diet, it used to be a very, very small amount of awareness and people using it. Now there's obviously a lot more awareness, a lot more people using it. It's being recommended. And I do speak to people often, and they say, oh, I've been doing the FODMAP, for years. And it's like, why are you doing that? It is a common thing for people to become trapped in the low FODMAP diet because they've figured out some of their triggers, and they're just terrified to reintroduce or to go back to normal eating, because they're just terrified that their symptoms will flare and recur again.
Yeah, that's totally correct too. And sometimes people just get lost to follow up, it's definitely worth the investment to go through the entire protocol with a practitioner. But if you're looking at several appointments over that period, sometimes it's just not a cost-effective strategy for people to be able to really see it through to the end. So they get half the information, they don't get the second half of it either.
Yeah, and I guess, with regards to the FODMAP diet, if people are about to embark on a protocol of FODMAP, it's because of IBS symptoms. I mean, what are some of the causes people get IBS in the first place? Is there some sort of main triggers? Like, is it all of a sudden it's like, I've got IBS, or are you born with it, or how does it, what are the contributing factors?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know what, to be honest, science is still not 100% clear on what the precise cause is of IBS, although there's this general consensus around some factors that might increase someone's risk of developing IBS. So there's definitely that genetic or inheritability aspect. So if you have someone in your family who has it, likely like a immediate family member like mum or dad, you're likely to develop IBS more so than someone who doesn't have it in their family. Age seems to be a factor as well. So generally the average age of an IBS sufferer is around 35, so onset at 35 years of age, although it can be any age and develop IBS. It can be lifestyle and environment, so specifically diet can be a huge factor around that. Stressed immune systems, stressed hormonal systems, stressed nervous system. So these are kind of the things that potentially increase someone's risk. And then you have the triggers. So the triggers are what cause the onset, which are usually things like environmental toxins, food sensitivities, hence why the low FODMAP diet can be effective. It can also be stress as well, so that bidirectional communication between your brain and your gut. But then there can also be dysbiotic gut bacteria as well. So that's another area that's now suggested to potentially be a contributing factor or trigger.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Lots and lots of different types of IBS. I think IBS is such a broad term, and it can be completely different from one person to the other, but it's kind of all, let's just put it in this IBS basket and we'll treat them together. But I think there's really, really different causes and different for everyone.
I mean, with your testing and stuff and the results that you're getting, you're seeing some patterns, like it's like, oh, another case of IBS that doesn't have this particular strain, or they have an overabundance of this. Like, are you starting to see some, like, are we working it out slowly?
Yeah, we definitely are. And it's actually really exciting to see that what our test results are indicating. So we actually have what's called the Microba Future Insights program, where people who complete our test can nominate to have their de-identified data used into further the research. And what we're seeing in terms of our research is actually matching up with what's happening with scientific circles around the world. So some of the common findings that we do see, they tend to have lower numbers of bacteria that produce butyrate, which is a substance that actually helps to reduce inflammation locally in the colon. And it also helps to maintain that nice cell integrity. So basically it makes your microbiome nice and protective, and ensuring that it's not negatively then interacting with like your immune system and your nervous system. You tend to also have a reduced diversity of the bacteria as well. There tends to be what's called increased temporal instability, which basically just means that the microbiome is very easily susceptible to change and quite dramatic change, whereas someone who doesn't have IBS, their microbiome tends to be more stable. And then depending on the type of IBS, so people who might be more prone towards IBS-C, so the constipation sides of things, they tend to have more or higher levels of methane-producing bacteria. And methane actually slows the motility or the movement of your gut, so makes sense why they would have higher levels of those bacteria, because it's potentially compounding their constipation. You also see potentially too that people who have IBS tend to be more sensitive to histamine in the gut, and sometimes they can also have high levels of histamine producing bacteria. So there's some of the main findings that we're tending to see.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's exciting what they can do, and the role that the microbiome places, and as we discover more, I guess it's going to be more.
They'll probably figure out different subtypes of IBS, and we'll start to see, I would imagine, the classification change. That's just my prediction.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, we're already up to the 4th revision of the IBS subtypes. So I'm sure there'll be a 5th and 6th and 7th as our understanding around the science continues to evolve.
Definitely.
So a little bit more on the FODMAPs, I think, because we have a lot of people, it's almost, I guess I wouldn't say it's a fad. It's not like a keto diet or paleo diet where I need to get fit and strong or whatever, but I am seeing a lot of Instagram and fun, quirky things. It's like FODMAP forever and all this sort of stuff, and it's, I guess, maybe explain some of the long-term effects of staying on a FODMAP diet too long, and what you're seeing to versus a healthy microbiome.
Yeah, for sure. So even just what I was alluding to at the beginning of this podcast, I guess if we start sort of higher level, there is quite a significant risk for malnutrition for these people, because they're exclusively avoiding quite a wide variety of foods. And with that can come the risk that there potentially can be weight loss. Like, that's a lot of things that becomes like a secondary consequence when working with patients who do have IBS, is that they just don't meet their calories, and so they start to lose weight. And depending on where they are, that potentially can be quite a concern. I guess more specifically then, looking at the gut microbiome. So you being on a restricted diet for a very long period of time, you're going to start to see a reduced diversity in the bacteria that you have. You're also going to see a reduction then too in the types of bacteria that live in your gut. So it's the fiber degrading bacteria that suffer the consequences of that. And so fiber degraders, their role really exists to actually reduce inflammation, to promote health. They help with regulating appetite, managing blood sugar levels. And so if you think about that in the short term, yeah, there's symptom relief and it's potentially helping this person. But then long term, they're going to start to see this shift with their gut microbiome that's going to start to actually promote a more pro-inflammatory gut, where the protein degrading bacteria are populating. They produce substances that increase inflammation, increase risk for chronic health problems like diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Yeah, it is, I guess, obviously long term, the high risk state is there, and we see it too as well. People, one lady I spoke to this morning has been on the low FODMAP diet for nearly 2 years, and so the whole emphasis was around, okay, you really need to start re-challenging, and you need to be doing that under the guidance or support of a licensed practitioner who can take you through the exact process.
Yeah. So I guess there's, you know, what are some of the things and tips you can give people on what not to do? I guess, you know, it's like, I don't mind a wine and a pizza, and you sort of suggest that the microbes can change, or the balance, or the diversity, or the how many there are, or whatever it is. Explain a little bit more about how they actually change from the way we eat and what we eat.
Fantastic. So I guess if we think more about the whole diet in context, if you're someone who consumes a really high fiber diet, you have a really varied diet in what you consume, specifically plant-based foods, the occasional pizza or wine is probably not going to hurt you that much. What happens though? So they're called metabolites. They're the functions that the gut bacteria produce, and what we eat has the most influence over what they're producing in that any one period of time. So that one little blip on a Saturday night of having pizza, it's going to shift their activity slightly. But when you look at the whole week in perspective, yeah, sure, it's fine. Like, it's not a major concern. But if you have a really low fiber diet, or you eat, you know, a very narrow window of foods, you have this tendency to eat a lot more protein and high fat containing foods, those functions are going to be more in favor of producing more of those pro-inflammatory metabolites. So you've got to, I guess, consider everything in context of what's happening usually for these people, as opposed to what's sort of happening in small snippets of time.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, interesting stuff. So I guess, is there one fits all, or is there some tips? Like, if I'm going to have pizza and wine, limit that to once a week.
There's pizza and there's pizza
well,
as well.
I get, you know, what am I putting on my plate? I guess it's different for the healthy gut you talked about, and then there's probably a protocol which is individually tailored for someone who has IBS, I guess, or has some issues.
Sorry, did you have a second part?
You know, I was just going to say, so, you know, some tips. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that watch this just who want to maintain optimal gut health.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be some people that are probably going to need a consult or something like that, you know,
totally,
to dive into it.
Yeah, totally. So look, my first piece of advice is don't just guess and try and do this yourself. If you really do have concerns around your digestive system, engage with a practitioner as your first point of contact, and trusted point of contact as well, because they are equipped with the knowledge to be able to determine whether or not you need further testing to determine what's the underlying cause. And we'll also be able to help you to identify when microbiome testing might actually be suitable for these people if they haven't necessarily undergone it as well. If you don't need to restrict it, then don't. That's also probably my second tip, is that sometimes people will just think, oh, okay, I'll just exclude all grains in my diet, as opposed to the grains that potentially are the FODMAP ones that are causing concerns, like wheat and gluten. But then potentially, well, not so much gluten, it's wheat, but potentially then they're not eating quinoa and rice and all of these other really incredible sources of grains that are really good for them. The other piece of advice that I could also give to as well, so the other two treatment modalities that have been shown to help IBS away from the low FODMAP diet are gut-directed hypnotherapy, and it's also indicated that probiotics potentially have their role in managing symptoms. Coming back to the gut-directed hypnotherapy, relatively non-invasive. You can work with a hypnotherapist who uses the appropriate model to help you with reducing that high frequency communication that might be occurring, especially if they are someone that is very stressed. So it's potentially another area that they can look at just as opposed to diet. Look, as far as probiotics are concerned, there's still some limitations around that research. They still don't necessarily know what the best strain is. And there's also a bit of a grey area around whether or not they need them for just treatment, or there's also a role for management as well. So that's where working with a practitioner, you're really going to get the best outcome, because they can factor your entire situation into it and then make the best decision from there as to which path you go down.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting about the hypnotherapy. What I've, found through speaking to people all these years about their gut issues is if you work with mind and gut simultaneously, I think that's the most powerful way to do it. So if you're covering, things like your deep breathing, meditation, yoga, relaxation, stress relief, whatever makes that person in that less sort of stressed state, because it's that bi-directional communication. If you can work on both together, I think that's so valuable.
So just so I understand, so if someone's quite a stress head or whatever, and you can stay, and what is that stress doing? Is it like depleting certain bacteria, or is it affecting the function? Like, do we have some clue in stress and the relation there?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually have more nerves that fire onto our gut than we do our spinal cord. So there's a lot of frequency that's happening between your nervous system and your gut, specifically how it impacts the gut bacteria. So it can shift the abundance levels or the percentages of the bacteria in your gut. So it doesn't change the types of bacteria. They're fairly constant in a mature microbiome, but you could see this shift to a more pro-inflammatory state while the stress is in existence for that person. So that means the microbiome is more likely to be pumping out these pro-inflammatory metabolites that are negatively affecting health. So definitely totally agree with you there, Jeannie, too. It's likely to be a multifactorial approach in managing IBS sufferers, because there's likely to be a huge component of stress that's needing to be managed.
And often you'll hear that the onset or the first time they've experienced IBS symptoms may have been around a stressful time, like university exams or high school, the very end, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's
correct. Major health issues like myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. So what about some other things that can impact? I mean, there's a big movement for just vegan, and then there's the carnivores, and and then there's
all these diets that are changing what we're eating and excluding things and having excessive amounts or really large amounts of one type of nutrient. That's fascinating what that can do to the microbiome, and you can see short-term changes in but what's the long-term impact? What's the science saying so far about the vegan diet versus the carnivore versus all of these different diets? What are you seeing in your results?
Yeah, so definitely you see a change in the types of bacteria that populate in the gut of people who are vegan versus maybe omnivorous. And then definitely, I guess, the other end of that spectrum is the carnivorous diet. And that kind of just goes against everything that we know is the best diet for the gut microbiome. The best diet is one that is inclusive of, high levels of grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, pulses, legumes, etc. All animal, though, isn't bad for the gut. Like, it's not saying that you need to completely cut it out of your diet, but it is really in context of what you're consuming as a part of your whole diet. So if people are eating quite a lot of animal protein in their diet, even if they are consuming, sufficient amount of fiber, potentially they're just still not getting diversity, and they tend to still have this more pro-inflammatory gut microbiome. So I don't think we're ever going to move to the space where we say that people need to go completely vegan or completely vegetarian, but it's about the composition of your entire diet. probably the dietary pattern that seems to have the best impact on health and also the health of the gut microbiome is the Mediterranean style of eating. So for those of you who don't know what the Mediterranean style
It includes wine.
Yeah, it does. Red wine, I'm in.
Pizza?
Pizza, yeah.
It's a diet that really focuses on the daily consumption of high plant foods like grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, etc. A weekly consumption of lean proteins, so an emphasis on things like eggs, poultry, legumes and beans, and oily fish. Really focuses on healthy fat consumption, so they recommend like 35 to 40% of your diet comes from like healthy omega-3s and some 6s, and then obviously avoiding or limiting red meat as much as you can.
What about things like, artificials and stuff? Like there's, I get annoyed. I'm in the supermarket looking for something. I'm looking, I don't even know what that is, that ingredient. I don't, and these numbers and stuff like that. Surely that's
artificial sweeteners, particularly, I think that's something you're seeing a lot more of. Or you've always seen them in your protein powders, and your protein bars, and your diet soft drinks, that sort of thing. So I know there is some research around artificial sweeteners.
Yeah, for sure. So look, most of the research to date when we're looking at clinical trials, has been in mouse models, and I'll explain why they're currently at this level, but there have been observational studies in humans though. So this one particular study, it was really interesting. It was looking at the sweeteners like aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, and potentially what happens to the gut microbiota. And so they were looking at specifically mice. Mice.
It's mice.
It's mice. Mice that have been fed those sweeteners, and they saw a complete shift in the bacteria, but also their glucose profile as well. So impaired glucose metabolism. They also had elevated fasting blood glucose levels. So they wanted to see, okay, if this is what's happening in mice when they're being fed these sweeteners, what's actually happening to humans who are consuming them? And so they just created a similar observational study where people were consuming those exact same sweeteners, and they had increased risk for metabolic disease, increased risk for obesity. They also too had impaired fasting blood glucose levels, as well as impaired glucose tolerance. And what I loved about this study was they actually took the bacteria from the humans and then put them back into the germ-free mice. And these mice who had no issues with their blood lipid levels or their sugar levels, all of a sudden then developed the same profile.
Yeah, wow.
So it's definitely shifting the bacteria in some way. And I guess it's just really showing us that these sweeteners initially were developed to try and cut down calorie consumption to help with weight loss or weight management, but it might actually be perpetuating the issue rather than solving it.
Well, it does ensure long-term sales for those companies producing those foods. It's like, I'm not sure if that's the intention, but yeah.
That's it. So my personal and professional opinion is if it's artificial, I don't think it's meant to be in your body.
Yeah. Second that. Yeah.
Yeah. Clean and green. More often than not.
The rainbow.
The rainbow.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. You got any deeper dive stuff? We can throw her a curveball or something while we got her in the hot seat.
I like curveballs.
No, I won't do that to her because I hate it when people do that to me.
It's at the markets, obviously,
Brad will throw you a curveball.
Yeah, of course I will. I mean, I just like to, Jeannie's always into the research of things and sort of keeping ahead of the game there, or reading a lot.
Trying to keep up,
as much as you can. Well, not ahead of the game, but yeah, just trying to keep up with what's going on. And there's so many misconceptions out there, and it's you see the people in the farmers markets are quite fit and healthy and vibrant and happy and got good demeanor. The characters are strong. I don't know. There's like a great energy. And then you go to the supermarkets, heads down, upset, cranky, telling kids to whatever, and they're big people, and so I'm not saying
that's a gross generalization.
Well, it's you really are what you eat, and I guess that footprint we have, or that microbiome, can really have a massive impact on
and then what you're putting in here
on us as the human vessel. I think there's this might be my fun fact, but it's there's a lot more cells, isn't there, in bacteria than actual human cells.
Yeah, we're more bacterial cells than what we are human cells. And also too, something that really just got me around the gut microbiome and how much it impacts your health is that bacteria actually produce more genes than what human genes do. So genes are essentially sets of instructions that communicate with one area of your body to another. So the fact that there are more of us and they have more genes that they can produce really indicates that they are a huge driving force for our health. And look, everyone gets the message in their own way. I always considered myself to be somewhat healthy, given that it's kind of comes with the job description as being a dietitian, but I really do think about what I put in my body now more than ever as a result of understanding just how much the gut microbiome impacts your health.
Yeah. You're not just eating for you, you're eating for gut impact. And I think you've got to consider that with, what do I feel like to eat? Is that my gut microbes asking for that? Cravings, the fact that your gut microbes can influence cravings, that is fascinating to me.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I mean, I'm definitely not very versed in that research. Like, I definitely spend a lot of time in the IBS world, but I think that's definitely, what we eat is obviously going to precipitate those changes. And obviously our body, we know that it happens with our taste buds. It's not to say that this isn't going to start happening with our gut bacteria as well, for sure.
Well, thank you, Bianca. It's been fascinating. I really appreciated chatting to you. It's been very insightful. And if people want to find more about Microba, where can they find about these testing kits and getting support and help and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely check out our website, which is www.microba.com. We're also on social media, so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, as Microba Official.
Cool.
Yeah, great articles and a lot of great info shared as well.
Yeah, Jeannie was reading some of the blogs that you've done earlier this morning. It was interesting. So yeah, lots of great information and help. Thanks again. And yeah.
We'll chat again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me on today.
No worries.
Thanks Bianca.
Bye. Wow, super fascinating.
Yeah.
So the interesting stuff for me was that stress, that correlation with stress and the bacteria, and that those, how often the gut is talking to the brain, I guess.
Constant, yeah.
And a little bit of wussa or, taking some chill time and.
So important.
Yeah. And I guess, with a lot of that clinical advice or that research and stuff, if you can settle down the stress, it may help settle down the belly problems.
Here's a question, just now that we're finished off.
Oh, yes. Well, we'll get it back. Are you there still?
Coffee. What's the research saying on coffee and the microbiome? I know the polyphenols are good, but
yeah, coffee is in. It is definitely in. So
you're definitely a coffee drinker then.
Can you tell?
I love coffee too, and I just read something recently about
the cortisol and the belly fat.
The belly fat and things like that, and it's like, no!
The only thing I'll mention about coffee is that in some people it can be an irritant. So unfortunately for those people who do have IBS, sometimes they might not be able to drink it because the coffee itself is irritant to the gut.
Yeah,
that's it. But for the average everyday person, the polyphenols are in. So a good cup of good quality coffee is definitely on the diet.
So Bianca, what are your top tips for anyone just wanting to maintain the healthiest gut, optimal function? What are your top tips?
Yeah, I love this question. So my first and foremost one is eat the rainbow. Definitely trying to eat different colors across all food groups is a great way to increase the diversity in your diet, as each food that you consume or fibrous food has a prebiotic in it that will fuel different bacteria. So the other benefit to that as well is that you're going to get an array of different vitamins and minerals. There are limitations if you just stick to the same types of food all the time. The other one is eat seasonally as well. So if you're not someone who goes to the farmers markets or a greengrocer to get your veggies, definitely recommend starting to get in the habit of doing that. Fruits and vegetables, when they're at their peak of season, have the most nutritional content in them. They're also the most bioavailable, which means your body and your gut microbiome are actually getting more out of the foods that you're eating. The third one is eat more grains. So that's definitely a trend that we're seeing with dieting culture, that people are just not consuming enough grains in their diet. And grains really are an excellent source of resistant starch, which is the prebiotic that really gets into the lower gut microbiome to feed the really beneficial bacteria living there. So if you don't need to avoid grains in your diet, and really not a lot of people should be avoiding all grains, some people might need to avoid things like gluten and wheat, but making sure that you're still accommodating for that by increasing other sources of naturally gluten-free containing grains like quinoa, rice, pasta, that's obviously a gluten-free source, etc., as part of your every week staples. The third one is manage stress. So we know that stress has quite a significant impact on the gut microbiome, and also can impact digestive systems as well, or your digestive symptoms, sorry, I should say, rather than system, although that kind of fits as well. So, making sure that you are someone that generally, focuses on deep breathing, potentially you help to put systems in place in your lifestyle as well. So if you are someone that does have that tendency to get in overwhelm, that you have systems in place to help you ensure that you don't reach that point, or that tipping point in your bucket of managing things in your day. Exercising regularly is a key one as well. So for the people that are listening to that, who are stop, start with their exercise, or I'll wait till Monday and start again, exercise increases the activity of the really beneficial bacteria in your gut that produce those anti-inflammatory substances. The key is consistency though, because if you stop exercising or you're really intermittent, these bacteria actually reduce back down in size. So you're not necessarily going to see that effect. And all it really needs is about 3 cardio sessions a week. So if you're thinking about fat burning walks, 45 minutes each time, it's enough to really see that beneficial impact. The other things that I can also recommend too as well are limit saturated fat in the diet. We know that this is not good for the gut bacteria. It increases the activity and the growth of the bacteria that promote inflammation. So being conscious around how much dairy you consume, how much animal protein you consume. And even for vegans, coconut products are delicious. They're incredible, but unfortunately they're really high in saturated fat. So we want to make sure that we're not overdoing those. And then the final tip that I have for you guys is making sure that you're not avoiding foods unnecessarily in the diet, because you're potentially putting a limitation to your nutritional content.
Excellent. Awesome tips. Thank you, Bianca.
No worries.
Very good. Well, on that note, it's time to make a cup of coffee to get through the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
No worries.
It's been great. And you can find more about Microba at their website, and more about Eat, Play, Poo. We got another episode coming up soon. We've got Eleanor, also from Microba, a doctor there, and we're going to dive into some of the
research.
Yes, yeah, so that'll be cool. So stay tuned for that, guys, and we'll see you all next time on Eat, Play, Poo. See you guys.
See you later.